In this presentation, we will take a look at state and local governmental accounting financial reporting model. Our general model is that we will have the basic financial statements and we'll have the government-wide activity, and then we will have the fund activity. We'll have the government-wide financial statements, we'll have the fund financial statements. Activities of governments are typically broken out into the categories of business type activities, governmental activities, and fiduciary activities. When we think about the different types of funds, we'll typically follow this kind of grouping model as we group the types of funds that will be set up. Business type activities are going to be similar to a for-profit type of organization where we might think that there's some type of customers involved in the process. Governmental activities, some type of service type of activity for the government, and fiduciary activities, thinking about a trust or some type of holding activity for the government where they have a fiduciary responsibility. Government-wide financial statements, now we're focusing in on the government-wide as opposed to the fund financial statements, have a measurement focus of economic resources, and therefore they're going to be using an accrual basis. They're going to be using an accrual basis as opposed to a modified accrual. Accountability will be operational. The government-wide financial statements have a statement of net position, reports year-end financial position. The statement of net position is, of course, very similar to what we would think of as a balance sheet. Where do we stand at a particular point in time? We're going to have different type of terminology, statement of net position, because, of course, we're going to name some of the accounts, especially the equity section for a for-profit organization, differently for a governmental organization, but we have the same kind of accounting equation, or a similar type of an accounting equation, where we would have assets minus liabilities equals equity, or in this case, the net position. You might hear a term net assets. We typically are going to use net position in the state governmental accounting. So in essence, balance sheet, where do we stand at a particular point in time? Statement of activity reports expenses and revenues classified by program or function. And this, of course, would be similar to the statement or an income statement. We're going to show the activity, the performance over time, expenses and revenue. Notice we're using an accrual basis and therefore have the term expenses rather than something like expenditures when we're considering the government-wide financial statement. Uses separate columns for governmental activities, business type activities, and component units. So we're going to break out those into separate columns for the governmental activity, business type activities, and component units. Fund financial statements will typically be grouped into government type funds, proprietary funds, and fiduciary funds. The government funds is going to be the largest grouping of different funds for different services of the government. The proprietary funds are going to be those activities where we have something similar to a for-profit organization, such as customers, and therefore can account for these funds on more of an accrual type basis. And the fiduciaries, where the government's going to have a fiduciary type of responsibility. When we consider the government funds, we're talking about fiscal accountability is going to be our focus. Flow of current financial resources. Notice that our focus here is on current financial resources, and therefore we're going to use modified accrual. So for most of the funds that we're going to set up, we're going to think about when do we set up a fund. Most of the funds we set up will be the government funds, the government fund types. Therefore, the focus is going to be on current financial resources, and therefore we're going to be using a modified accrual basis as opposed to the government-wide activities where we use the accrual basis. Then we have the proprietary funds, and the proprietary funds are going to be those that are similar to a for-profit organization. They function in essence more like a sole proprietor or a for-profit type of organization, in that we have something like customers, and therefore our focus is operational accountability, flow of economic resources, and therefore we use the accrual basis. So this is going to be more similar when we think of proprietary funds of what we would expect for a for-profit type of organization, using an accrual basis in essence because it's functioning in a similar fashion as a for-profit organization, given the fact that we have that for-profit type of nature, possibly having customers that we're charging for some types of goods or services. And then we have the fiduciary fund, where we might have some kind of holding or trust type fund, a fiduciary type activity. You can imagine something like a donation to a governmental fund where you can't touch the actual principal, but the interest on it is something that can be used, or something like that. We have the fiduciary activity. that is going to have an operational accountability, flow of economic resources, and also using the accrual basis. So once again, overview, typically considering funds, most of the funds will be grouped up here, government type funds, and use that modified accruals. That's where your default wants to be. And then we'll have those types of funds that could be proprietary or fiduciary when those are in place, when they're applicable. And those types of funds will be using what we would be more familiar with, the accrual basis. Government funds will have a balance sheet, a statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. And notice when we consider these financial statements, remember we have the government-wide activities and then the funds. The funds are broken out in their own set of books, their own set of general ledgers, and therefore we can create their own financial statements with them. When we consider the governmental type funds, we have a balance sheet, we have a statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Long way to say this is kind of the equivalent of the income statement, but you'll note that it's going to be, because it is on the modified accrual type basis, we have expenditures here, and there's going to be a different, basically, accounting method for it. But in essence, of course, we have the position statement, balance sheet, where are we at a certain point in time, and the activities statement, how have we done over a given time frame, starting and ending point, statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. In the proprietary funds, we have the statement of net position, balance sheet type of account, and then the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund net position. Again, income statement type of account, closer to what we would expect, like an income statement, because we have the term expenses here rather than expenditures, indicating a accrual method as opposed to a modified accrual method being used above. And then a statement of cash flows. And then we have the fiduciary fund, which has a statement of fiduciary net position and a statement of change in fiduciary net position. Again, same kind of activity or thought process there, of course. Where do we stand at a point in time? What has happened over a certain time frame? Governmental accounting reconciliation. Due to governmental activities being reported using the accrual basis in the government-wide financial statements, so remember the government-wide financial statements use the accrual basis, but reporting using a modified accrual basis in the governmental funds financial statements. So we have a different method being used for the government-wide, and then we break out the fund activities. We're using a different method, accrual versus a modified accrual. Fund balances and operating results on fund balance financial statements must be reconciled to those presented on the government-wide financial statements. So due to this difference, due to these two methods being used, we need to have a reconciliation process between the two.